All right, I think we're ready to get started here. Exciting to have everyone involved. Thank you so much. Before we get rolling with everything, we want to make sure we do some important background work, and we always start every one of our University Scholar lecture series with the land acknowledgement. So let's begin there, and then we'll take some time to introduce.
We'd like to begin this program by recognizing that while we gather at San Jose State University, we're gathered on the ethno-historic tribal territory of the Tamien Ohlone, who were the direct ancestors of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and who were missionized into missions Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores. San Jose State University also desires to honor the military service of the Muwekma men and women who have honorably served overseas during World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and who are still serving in the United States Armed Forces today.
So thank you for that. Always good to start with our land acknowledgement and recognize where we are seated. I want to begin with a couple of announcements before I introduce our speaker. The first one is we record this webinar, and eventually it'll be available on the library website. We have an archive of all of these meetings. The second is we're going to use the Q&A function today, which is located at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom. When you have a question, just put it there. People can vote up or down on a question. If they think the question relates to something they want to ask, we can use that. So please go ahead and use that feature, and we'll use that to moderate the Q&A at the end of the talk. I also have to thank everyone who's thrown this together, brought this together, including our amazing library team who's on this call today. The Office of the Provost, the King Library, the School of Information Systems and Technology, and the Division of Research and Innovation have all brought this to us today. So with that, let me begin by introducing our speaker. I'm very excited to have Dr. Jalal Sarabadani here today from the School of Information Systems and Technology. He has a MSBA and a PhD from Washington State University. He has an MA from the University of Tehran and a BS in Information Technology and Engineering for Payam Noor University as well. So he's got 4 degrees. He beats me by 1, so well done there. He has numerous papers writing about all kinds of really important questions today, and he's been recognized for his work, including an AMSIS 2025 conference top 25 paper. He's written on the topics of burnout in agile teams, ethical considerations of generative AI-enabled unit and resource management in journals like Organizational Dynamics and the Journal of Information Systems Education. He's a collaborative researcher working with a lot of people together. So I'm really excited for his talk today. I want to thank him for taking the time. So with that, I'm going to move aside and let Jalal begin with understanding and managing the dark side of IT. Jalal.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Del Casino, for the introduction, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my research today. I also would like to thank our people here, Dr. Albert, Dr. Megberg, and also Dr. Cannon for nominating me to have the chance to present here. Okay, so today's topic is going to be about understanding and managing dark side of IT. I was initially thinking about kind of talking a little bit about different types of research that I do. Then I decided it might be better to focus on something that is very applicable and timely in today's, specifically in our context. But before I dive into the topic I'd like to I'd like to say a little bit about my research. Most of my research focuses on the dark side of IT, basically the challenges associated with the use of technology in different contexts. During my PhD, I focused a lot on technostress, which is basically at the high level. It's the combination of technology and stress and how people get stressed out due to their interaction with technology. In particular, my dissertation focuses on after hours work connectivity and how people's employees' engagement with technology after working hours can be a stressful experience, and then how it influences their sense of job satisfaction. And over the past few years, since actually joining SJSU, I have worked on new topics such as problematic use of generative AI in higher education, as well as cybercrime. The cybercrime actually paper is a very interesting one. This is a literature review paper on understanding the landscape of cybercrime, different topics, and giving a holistic view of the cybercrime. And it's interesting to know that this paper has been under review for over 2 years now, and we are on the 4th round of revision. So fingers crossed that this paper will be out soon, actually. So for today, I would like to basically focus on problematic use of generative AI in higher education. I want to keep it a little bit more conversational. I will report findings from our research around this topic. I will actually talk about some of the exercises I've been doing in order to see how I have actually implemented the recommendations we talk about in our papers. And then I'll talk about my ongoing research on this topic. So I'm going to start with the first paper, which we basically, this is a very interesting paper. I was an early adopter of ChatGPT when I was towards the end of my PhD program. And we started writing this paper, I guess, 2 months or 3 months after, since ChatGPT, after launching ChatGPT was launched. And it was very interesting that how the ideas came together. I was more on the dark side. I was so curious to see what are the different ways that I can actually use ChatGPT for education. And then I had my PhD advisor, and then also his colleague. Actually, we formed a team and then worked on the paper. In this paper, we basically focused on some of the challenges that information systems education was facing with the introduction of ChatGPT. We introduced some challenges for different in different areas. The first one we talked about was what are the different ways that students might be using ChatGPT in most of framing it as a problematic use. We were talking about some use cases like cheating, like plagiarism, and not being able to actually develop the essential skills that are necessary for the students. And then as a result of those discussions, we also brainstormed about what are some of the consequences that might be associated with this kind of use in higher education. At the high level, we proposed 2 ideas. One was outsourcing higher level thinking to tools like ChatGPT would actually undermine students would not basically be helpful for students to develop some important soft skills that are needed in industry, like being able to think critically, having the ability to solve problems. But other than that, we also thought generative AI would be the new skill. And it's also another challenge that the students would face. They need to there was an issue of student need market fit, which means basically market is going to demand some new skills from the students, and the students need to basically adapt to respond to this demand. And this wasn't just a concern for the students. We were also thinking about the faculty, some of the challenges that the faculty are going to face. The first one we thought about, and then we were actually reflecting on, was about the curriculum. Once we were using actually the traditional curriculum before ChatGPT, we were actually testing how easy would it be to solve or answer some of the questions that we actually asked students to do, or some of the assignments to do as take-home exams or take-home assignments or online exams. And we quickly came up with the result that, okay, if this is available to them, it's going to be easy. So part of it was there is a huge need to reassess, to revisit how we're going to assess students' capabilities and abilities, the skills that they develop. And that was one thing. The other one was adaptation of the learning materials. We knew that this is not a fad and it's going to stay for a long term. And what is the strategy? How the faculty are going to respond to this change was actually of question. So that was one thing from the curriculum part, but also the faculty development itself, something I would say a concern. And this is part of my research on technostress. It's a term called techno-uncertainty, where the presence of a new technology actually creates kind of an uncertainty and also insecurity. The new technology creates a lot of stress for the individuals to basically learn about new technology and apply them in their jobs, but also at the same time, people will start to freak out that this new technology is going to replace my job. So this was the challenge. Another challenge we were thinking about: how would faculty should actually feel about this, and how are they going to respond to this? Given these challenges we talked about, we started to basically give some anticipate a few scenarios that would faculty respond. And we came up with 4, like faculty could do nothing about this. They could completely prohibit the use of technology, generative AI tools in their classrooms, or they can allow limited use of generative AI tools in their classroom, or embrace AI tools as legitimate learning aids. Our position was basically number 4, for several reasons. With the first 3 ones, they would create a lot of challenges for the faculty in the classroom and also students. If we completely ignore this, if we completely prohibit this, we're going to have groups of students who are not developed enough to be ready for that market, which actually is demanding new sets of skills. And for the faculty, it would also create a lot of challenges because they would stay. And again, this is for also students and also faculty, they would stay behind innovation. We know that every week there's a change in updates we see about new generative AI based capabilities we see in tools in the education and also in the industry. And one of the other challenges we were talking about was specifically with number 2 and 3, if you want to go with prohibit use and allowing limited use, it's very hard to actually distinguish and create a boundary of what is a good example of use, what is not a good example of use, and how you want to separate at what point you should use ChatGPT or other tools in your classroom, at what point you don't want to use. But we thought maybe this is the time. It's actually a perfect time to see how we can leverage this disruptive technology in our classrooms, in our curriculum, and transform the experience of education, as well as helping our students and also faculty to be prepared for the new landscape of education. So with these scenarios in mind, we started to give some recommendations, and I actually, after this one, I will talk a little bit about these recommendations, and then I will show how I have been actually implementing these recommendations in my work over the past year and a half. So I think the first one we talked about was for both faculty and students. Make sure you educate yourself, make sure you stay up to date with the generative AI and understand how it's actually informing your classroom and how you can actually learn how to use it in your classroom too. Could be in the form of basically increasing student support, changing redesigning your assessments, or even redesigning the how you actually teach in the classroom. And at the same time, we thought this is also our responsibility to teach and educate our students as well, so that they develop the skills they need to be basically industry ready. And as you can see, all of these are part of adaptation, right? We have to have the mindset of adapting to the situation and making changes that help us to be ready in this world. And then we also talked about the first thing is basically decide on a response. Our favorite one is always to embrace the change. because the opportunities it creates for us to thrive and grow is much more than just ignoring the opportunities and just overlooking the change we are going through. And we also recommended the faculty to develop and apply policies. Basically, try to be clear on how you define responsible use of generative technology in classroom and outside of the classroom. So this slide is a very interesting one to me. Over the past 18 months, I was trying to see how I can actually leverage generative AI in my classroom as well, and even outside of the classroom. Basically, I was thinking about if I am recommending some suggestions to people outside, what are the different ways that I can do it myself? So the first one, if you look at this, I've always had the mindset of, I'm trying to always have actually the mindset of, first of all, adaptation is necessary. Again, I'm going to go back to my sentence that I don't think generative AI or AI is a fad. I think it's the next standard for education, for anything. It's the next important skills that everybody needs to have to stay competitive. Otherwise, you will lose the competition. And definitely, maybe that's the case where we say you will be replaced if you don't keep up. So I always try to have this mindset. And as a result of this mindset, I try to educate myself and whatever I learn, I try to also apply it in my classes, my classroom, in my research, and also teaching it to my students. So some of the pictures you see here, for example, I always try to use generative AI to increase students' support. So I try to develop different GPTs, custom chatbots in ChatGPT to help my students automate some of the tasks for myself and also increase accessibility of education to all of my students and also meet different needs. For example, if you see on the one that is below the student support category, it's LearnBuddy. It's basically a GPT that tries to meet everybody's learning style. So if you are kind of like someone who learns better through scenarios, that actually helps you to learn through scenarios. If you are a kind of person who learns through exams or quizzes, pop quizzes, that one actually you can choose it and then learn more about materials that we discuss in the class or practice the topics we discuss in the class using this GPT. If you see, I also actively take actions to basically transform my classes as well, like redesign the curriculum. The course that I teach in the School of Business is the SysTech is Systems Analysis and Design. We basically teach students how software is developed. There's no coding in this class. In the past, I used to, there's a lot of basically dry topics in this class. And it was really hard to kind of help students to push them forward towards creating a working application. But these days with ChatGPT and other tools like N8N, students are able to create AI agents that are actually doing the work, automating a lot of business workflows. So you see the top rows in the student education side. I am actively learning myself how to automate business workflows and also create AI agents. So I am a learner myself here. And at the same time, I try to transfer this knowledge to my students. So this semester, I held different workshops on building AI agents in my classes without any coding experiences. And I got some good feedback from students that they really liked it. And interestingly, one of the success stories of these workshops was when one of my students was actually having an interview the next day of the workshop, and she was told that she would be asked some questions about automating business workflows using N8, and so it was a perfect timing for her. And at the same time, what I try to do is to also spread the word, make this impact as broad as possible. To this goal, I was actually collaborating with OpenAI, and then what we did, they invited me to create videos on how professors teach with generative AI. So that's actually one of the kind of the photo of my video in OpenAI Academy website, and I'm happy to share the link to that website later as well. And other things I do is basically I try to collaborate, network with people, exchange ideas. That would mean the ability to see what are the opportunities, what are the challenges people are facing. 3 weeks ago, I was invited to OpenAI's main office in San Francisco, and there was a crowd of higher education leaders, including faculty and also leaders of education of institutions. And there were a lot of collaborations and discussions around how we can reflect these changes into higher education in our classrooms. Other things I have done so far is that with the help of Dr. Albert, we actually applied for an internal grant. I was responsible to create a micro insertion on how to use generative AI responsibly. If you look at the results, basically we took a survey before the intervention and also after the intervention, and the results were actually statistically significant, helping students to be more confident about their ability to use these tools in a more responsible manner. And other things that I try to do is basically redesign my curriculum. I try to move from a reactive kind of style of teaching towards more proactive way where I will use active learning activities and experiential learning to engage students and actively show them how they can actually use generative AI as their companion, not as a tool to skip the learning aspect of it. So if you look at some of the examples, if you see that Lego, actually as a faculty, I always use ChatGPT to see how I can turn a dry topic, an old exercise into a very engaging exercise. So yesterday, for example, we were talking about IT standardization in the class. And initially I was thinking about maybe a discussion-based class or a case-based class. And then I was thinking about, I have these Legos in my office. I use it in my other class, but I was thinking, is there a way that I can design an experiential experience, an active learning exercise with Legos? So I turned into ChatGPT. Basically, what I did was I gave it context. A lot of prompting was there, but it helped me to brainstorm a lot and redesign the whole class experience. And we had an hour and 15 minutes of fun in the class, but at the same time, we were able to basically achieve what the chapter objectives was, which was really interesting. And at the same time, I'm trying to work with different industry companies as well to see how I can incorporate their products into my classroom to be able to shift redesign my curriculum as well. And I have research and networking on the left side. So I think research is a very interesting part that allows me to take a deeper dive into these important topics and understand the mechanism underlying different behaviors students have, or even what are the different ways we can actually leverage the benefits of generative AI in the classroom for the students, for the faculty. And again, all of these are possible with networking. I think networking is a very important part of the process. I always try to work with people who have different perspectives. All the time, these lead to the generation of new ideas, sharing ideas, and even collaborating on different topics. So this was study one and kind of how I have been working on my own, embracing these changes and basically act on the recommendations we had on our first paper. The second paper is coming from very interesting experiences throughout these 18 months of working heavily with generative AI tools. Time to time, I was talking to my students. I was observing their behavior, basically looking at different assignments and then talking to my colleagues. And I noticed that a couple of interesting instances of the impact of generative AI in the classroom. So as an educator, I have to say that we all have seen it, that there are places where you think about this text is too long, it's too clean, it's less likely that you see such a nicely written, neatly written text from a student. You don't want to blame them, but you want to stay and think about this. And at the same time, I was talking to different colleagues of mine. They were very frustrated. They were expressing their frustration about potentials of problematic use of generative AI in their classroom. And I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. I'd like to learn more about the dark side of using generative AI in classroom and do different research about around this topic. I think we are at a very early stage on the problematic use of generative AI. And I'd like to know more about this. So I started to think about what is the best way for me to take a deeper dive into the topic. And I found doing a literature review on students' problematic use of generative AI. The early version of this paper was submitted to one of our top conferences in information systems, and we got very interesting feedback, and it was a good feeling to see that your paper gets actually recognized as the top 25% of the conference. So it was very interesting. And it was an indication that this is a very timely topic. It attracts a lot of attention. And we presented the paper to the conference in Montreal, and we got a lot of interesting feedback that motivated me even more to think about this topic and do something about this. So for the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about this paper, and if you have any questions, this is going to be a stakeholder view of the topic. So basically, I want to understand problematic use of generative AI from a stakeholder perspective, because the main premise of this paper is that the students' behavior is not conducted in isolation. But the students work in an ecosystem of education where there are multiple actors in this landscape, in this environment, and each action is impacted by multiple actors, and also subsequently, students' actions also have effects on different actors as well. So I think this is the easiest way to motivate this paper. We know that generative AI is everywhere in higher education. According to Statistica, in 2024, more than 84% of students are actually using generative AI tools for their higher education. And then when I walk in my classrooms as well, I always see that ChatGPT is up. And this is great that students are using actually ChatGPT and other tools for their academic efforts. We know that there are a lot of benefits with the use of ChatGPT and tools related to that. Sorry, I keep saying ChatGPT because that's my only tool and main tool that I am using for different purposes. We know that they have a lot of benefits. The students' studying practices have changed. But at the same time, we know they represent some challenges as well. One of again, as you see on the right side, this is one of the challenges I actually faced. Is a lot common when we and my colleagues and I talk to each other. Students use generative AI to do their tasks. Sometimes they engage in problematic use, but the consequences are actually reflected on professors. So it just triggered to me, this is a very interesting, what do we know from a holistic perspective? What are the reasons that actually we wanted to answer the question, what are the reasons that motivate students to engage in such behaviors? What are these behaviors, and how conducting such behaviors actually influence different actors in the higher education ecosystem? So in order to be able to understand these, answer these questions and understand the current state of the literature in research, we conducted a literature review. In order to make sure that we are doing a systematic literature review, we started by searching the literature. And we conducted a literature search in common business databases like Web of Science, Scopus, and Informs. And we tried to use as many keywords as possible close to students' problematic use of generative AI in higher education. Because this topic is also novel and new, we tried to include conference papers as well. And our initial search of the literature gave us about a little bit over 1,000 papers. Once we identified once we did with the literature, we're done with the literature search, we started the screening. Because we had papers from different databases, we expected some duplication. So we started to remove duplications. And after that, we started to read every single paper's title to make sure that we exclude the papers that are not within the scope of our literature review. For example, we found a lot of papers talking about the benefits of generative AI in higher education. These topics were not within the scope of our literature review. We only wanted to focus on papers that talk about the problematic use of generative AI in higher education, basically on the dark side. We eliminated a lot of papers at this stage, but again, once we were done with this one, we moved to the last stage, which was the refinement. And again, we were left with about 112 papers. And at this stage, we took a deeper dive into each paper. We read the title, we read the abstract, we read the research questions, the introduction, and even the research models. We wanted to make sure we only include papers that are talking about the challenges and dark side of generative AI, problematic use of generative AI in higher education. In this phase, for example, we found papers were talking about mitigating, for example, plagiarism in higher education. While this topic was about plagiarism, the focus was not on the challenges of plagiarism itself, but more about ways to mitigate plagiarism in higher education. So it was out of, again, our scope, so we excluded the paper. We also did forward and backward citation, which basically means we read all the citations within the papers we had. We also looked them up in Google Scholar to make sure and saw how many papers cited these papers to make sure that we don't miss any papers for our comprehensive literature review. And our final sample size is now 34. So we used two theories to inform our literature review, to guide our literature review. One was the driver action outcome framework, which basically says anyone's action is based on some motivations, and then each of actions people take actually has some consequences. But here we needed another theory to bring the holistic view of actors, and then we talked about stakeholder theory. The stakeholder theory is basically based on the fact that any organization's decision-making is based on pressure from different actors, some of the actors or the stakeholders. These stakeholders could be internal or external. And the decisions also organizations make have some consequences for different stakeholders as well. Those stakeholders, again, could be the internal ones and also the external one. So we thought we created a theoretical model that informs our literature review within saying that a student problematic use of generative AI is motivated by or is influenced by different stakeholders within the higher education space and as well as outside of education space. And these problematic behaviors can also influence multiple stakeholders. We define different stakeholders. So for here, we have focal stakeholder, who is the student itself. Internal stakeholders are referred to any entities inside the higher education domain, like student peers, educators, and even policymakers inside the education, as well as external stakeholders who are basically outside of this domain. So what did we find? We found 4 problematic common use behavior of generative AI. The first one was plagiarism, use of generative AI content without appropriate acknowledgement. The second one was cheating, basically using generative AI to replace one's intellectual effort. The third one was overdependence, which basically forming this maladaptive habit where students' first point of reference is ChatGPT or other tools instead of self-initiating efforts and their cognitive processing. And the last one we found was misuse, which is kind of talking about the misalignment between the intended pedagogical function of generative AI tools and the actual ways actually students engage with them. Most of what we found about the drivers of these actions, problematic themes of behaviors, what we're actually studying coming from a focal stakeholder perspective, which was the student perspective. We found a lot of factors, including intrinsic deficit, such as lack of self-efficacy, students' amotivation. We also found cognitive affective factors like academic pressure, anxiety. We found factors such as rationalization, where basically students justify that, okay, everyone is actually using ChatGPT and it doesn't harm anyone. So that motivate them to use them in a problematic way. And the other one we found was actually students' personality trait. So different personality traits also motivate students' use. For example, students with openness personality or extrinsic personality are more likely to experiment new things and also take risks. And sometimes they also go beyond the ethical limits, and then it becomes a blurry space. And then then they are more likely to experiment, to engage with problematic use of generative AI. With intrinsic deficit, most of the times you can see students who have no motivation for college, looking for ways to basically use generative AI as a buffer, look for tools as a buffer. So these tools like generative AI bring them high level of reward in a very short amount of time with low cost, given that they have come to the conclusion that it's hard to detect and it's hard to argue with detection tools that it's a form of a problematic use. It becomes their first point of reference for the tools. We also found factors related to internal and external stakeholders, like cultural factors, peer pressure and norms, and family-related factors. For example, one of the studies reported fobbing, which is basically having someone's ignoring you by looking at their phones. So we found this also as an external factor from outside of the domain that would lead to students' loneliness, and in turn, they would return to tools like generative AI in order to be able to compensate for that loneliness. While there were a lot of focus on focal stakeholders, students themselves, we found very limited papers focusing on the outcomes associated with problematic use of generative AI, even on the students themselves. But we found very limited papers talking about superficial learnings, where students, basically when students engage with problematic use of generative AI, they outsource learning to a tool and they disengage with the cognitive processing activities. And as a result of that, they develop superficial learning, engage with superficial learning. And again, when the students engage with generative AI tools, they develop a sense of efficiency, that they can do tasks in a very short amount of time, and that is also positively related to procrastination, where they put off their own task until the very last minute, which is because of the problematic use of generative AI. So to wrap up, I guess I have only 5 minutes. What we found from the literature was, I want to talk about some of the highlights of what we found and what are the different directions we offered for the future research. We still noticed that there's a lot of focus on students. There's a lot of focus on topics that we already knew, plagiarism, teaching. These are some topics that are not new, but they are just being done with a different tool. But what is interesting to know, and we encourage researchers to do, is what are some unique problematic use of generative AI that are appearing because of these tools? For example, we are seeing some initial reports about harassing students by using generative AI. So this is a very interesting topic to see how these are to understand the new problematic use of generative AI in higher education, like using deepfakes, for example. We also noticed that the literature focuses a lot on one stakeholder, which is the student itself. As I explained, according to our framework, students' behavior is actually affected by different stakeholders, and it has impact on different stakeholders. So we'd like to see more research on how the different stakeholders actually influence students' behavior and how students' behavior influence different stakeholders. For example, what is the relationship between parenting styles on students' problematic use of behavior, or how problematic use of behavior by students influences, for example, professors or educators' mental well-being. We also noticed that a lot of research papers used cross-sectional surveys in order to conduct their research. While there's nothing wrong with cross-sectional surveys, there are some limitations with research with these research design. We thought there are also opportunities to use novel methodologies to actually answer some more complicated questions. Like in my dissertation, I use fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, which helps us understand what are some different ways, different conditions, or different motivators that get together that triggers problematic use of generative AI. We know that there are multiple ways, multiple triggers that create this, forces the students or motivates the students to engage in such behaviors. But it's interesting to know what are these different conditions. And finally, most of the papers are basically, again, using similar theories we saw in the previous stream research. But I think there's a lot of opportunities at this time to actually develop theories and to understand how actually such practices, for example, develop and diffuse in higher education. So with that, I'm going to, I guess, finish my presentation. Thank you very much for being patient with me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you have here.
Awesome.
I hope I'm on time.
No, you're doing great. There's plenty of time. It's so much richness to what you provided us. So there are a few questions here. I have a few of my own, but I want to make sure the audience gets to ask theirs first. One of the first questions is, can you elaborate on the term misuse of GAI and how it differs from the other three common themes?
Yeah, so this is basically one of the comments we have in this paper. There's one of the challenges with okay, let me, sorry. My screen is shared, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let me go to this slide. So one of the actually kind of avenue for future research we're talking about here is the conceptual clarity. Basically the overall definition of misuse here is the lack of alignment between what we think it should be used and how it's actually been used. But if you look at this, plagiarism is actually part of it. Cheating is also a part of it. And the literature is talking about that. But when we were reading these papers, we were focused on how the literature is referring to. So we think future research needs to pretty much try to find a way to clarify misuse from other categories. The only thing we see here is more about, I guess misuse is the umbrella term for plagiarism, cheating, and over-dependence.
So if I can follow up on that, and there are other questions, but now I want to follow up since you opened this slide. One of the things you note, though, is that students are sometimes concerned they may have imposter syndrome, or they're thinking that they're not really up to snuff, and they use these technologies. Is there a different way to frame it than problematic practices that could help in a classroom for faculty to think about? Or does the literature talk about that, knowing students may be using it as a way to compensate for what they believe might be an inadequacy that they have that may not really be there, but they don't know even how to talk to a faculty member about it? Anything you saw in the literature there?
So in the literature, one of the conversations is happening right now. What I'm seeing here is because of the nature of the new technology, everything is new. There's a lot of ambiguity is also here in the research. But what we are seeing here is now is problematic use, specifically in today's world with generative AI, is not a binary, is not viewed as a binary like you did or didn't. It's more of a continuum. Specifically with plagiarism and other things, there is a continuum of to what extent you're actually going through the dark side of it. Some of them is okay, some of them is not. But again, it's very difficult to define. And I think from a faculty perspective, if I want to say what are the implications, I would say the best way is to be so clear in terms of what is a good practice, what is not a good practice, or a problematic use in higher education. That's basically what we are in the literature right now. It's very, for some of the use cases, it's very difficult to see what's the border. It's kind of in the borderline.
So following up on this, one of the questions was, what are some of the ways you found to overcome reasons for problematic use of AI? And the follow-up on this is, does it involve morality or a question of ethics or teaching students about those kind of things?
So what I have come up with, what I'll do in my classes is that I don't engage in any kind of policing activities. I think it's a lose-lose game for the students and also the teacher. What I'll do in my classes is I always try to focus on awareness and give them examples of what it means to be problematic. What is a good instance of problematic use of generative AI and what is not? For example, I had an in-class assignment. It's called In the News. And this is kind of a reflection assignment. And I say it up front, there is a very great opportunity for you to engage with problematic use of generative AI. And I can easily understand whether students engage with these kind of things. There are some instances that I can see and make my judgment, but I don't take the action to just say I don't blame the student on that because I don't think this is the right behavior. Instead, I talked with them in the class and say, for example, if you go do the search yourself, find the article, create your own reflection of the exercise, and then use ChatGPT to kind of polish your writing, to me, that's a good exercise because you took the heavy lifting of the work. But if you just do a prompt to ChatGPT and say, give me an article and give me a summary of it, what it says, and answer these questions, this is definitely a problematic engagement with generative AI tools. And again, one other thing I say is that this is your education, this is your responsibility, and you always remain accountable for what you do. And this is not for getting the grade for this. Think about at the higher level that you are building the habit of looking for shortcuts and workarounds. And it doesn't end here. It actually continues with you in your personal life and your professional life. So that kind of conversations I always prefer to engage with my students rather than just going with acting out in police.
So that's a perfect segue to another question that came in, which I think asks about relationship to the literature. So do the students' eventual potential workplaces also have definitions of problematic use that map to these? So I don't know if you've looked at the sort of workforce literature yet, but that it's an interesting question that segues nicely with what you just said.
So as I said, the literature is so new. What we tried to do, we focused on capturing all kind of problematic use instances of generative AI to at least focus on this topic. And then we coded the papers to see what are the different actors are involved. There's a few conversations about how it should be. I mean, non-empirical papers, but empirical papers are so rare. And most of the non-empirical papers are talking about the context of education, but not from the perspective of employers' perspective. But these are great research opportunities to understand.
So, yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think it is. How is this going to, because you're right, it's so new. What's going to happen, and how is the workforce going to respond? Because everyone's, the head of NVIDIA says, hey, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI.
Yeah.
But are we asking the ethical and responsible questions when that statement is coming through? And I do think there's going to be kind of a response back within the broader market of jobs of making sure people are aware of what they're doing, right? It's not just being able to answer questions with AI. So one of the questions that came up, which I think is an interesting one as well, is what if you never use ChatGPT? What if it's not part of who you are? Do any of the studies kind of come across students or who are like, I'm out, I'm not engaging this right now? Did you see any of that in the literature?
To be honest, I do not remember any instances of a student side. But this might be interesting. I'm seeing instances of professors giving up using ChatGPT for education. So they are being so frustrated with different ways that students are using it in a problematic way, and they're trying to kind of isolate the use of ChatGPT to make sure that this is happening. But I think both of them do not have a bright, let's say, future. If the students don't use it, they're going to lose to the market. They're not going to be industry ready. That requires AI as a new skill at this point. And again, for faculty, if faculty are not going to use generative AI in their classes or any other tools, again, they will, as I said in my first paper, they will stay behind the technology, and then they will have a very hard time. There will be this gap between students and also faculty as well.
Yeah, I think that is a real challenge, and a lot of people are talking about that right now is, how do we integrate and think that. And I will say there are a couple, they're not questions, but comments that came up about how people are using it. One of your colleagues talks about how people are using ChatGPT to actually compare to original research in classes. Very interestingly, someone said you can use AI to find the public sources on the problems of AI. So in itself, it's right, it's committed to that. So, well, I want to thank you so much for an amazing conversation. I really appreciate this very much. We want to thank everyone for joining us today, and want to thank Dr. Sarabadani for his work. Very excited. Obviously, this will be published and it'll be coming out, so everyone will get to see it, and you can share it with other colleagues throughout the campus. So thank you so much again, and I really appreciate it. Great presentation.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. It was a great pleasure to present my work.